Matt, the government says we're winning in Vietnam. It should be over any day now. Wait a minute.
And we're now battling American Marines and military police. The Viet Cong had penetrated to the center of what was supposed to be the most secure
Uncle Sam, what the hell?
in Vietnam.
Wow.
I don't know. It's the worst area we've been in since I've been in Vietnam.
You think it's worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. They say we're fighting for something. I don't know.
From the beginning of the draft, the war in Vietnam had begun to grow in opposition. By 1965, the U.S. was bombing North Vietnam, and a multitude of anti-war movements were in full effect across the country. As the media accounted for the loss of American lives and made the Tet Offensive's impact evident to the American eye, the American public began to realize that the resolution of the war was nowhere in the near future. This led to the majority of Americans, at the minimum, believing that the war wasn't a worthwhile cause. By 1967, America had over 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam, costing us somewhere close to $25 billion a year. American casualties had reached up to 500,000 killed and over 100,000 wounded. The economic and moral effect of the war that Americans had experienced and protested soon begun to erode at the reasoning for our original purpose of involvement. The government and troops overseas felt this, causing some of them to no longer wanting to participate. As soon as our reasoning for Vietnam became distorted, the war was lost. It was only a matter of time until America pulled out. Close to no public support and a low morale of American soldiers accumulated to our fated withdrawal and defeat.
I don't trust the government.
Yeah, me too.
The Vietnam War was perhaps the most publicized war in American history and certainly the first televised war with ghastly images nightly on the evening news. Over the years, news coverage of the war shifted from supportive to an increasingly grim portrayal of the fighting. As the reporting became increasingly negative, as casualties continued to mount, public doubts grew dramatically. Marshall McLuhan emphasized how television brought the brutality of war into the comfort of the living room. Vietnam was lost in the living rooms of America, not on the battlefields of Vietnam. That coverage of the Vietnam War and its impact on the public became a serious concern. Early in 1968, polls showed 61% of Americans supported by the war. By year's end, 53% opposed it. By the time Armstrong landed on the moon, 58% opposed it, and support for the war would continue to fall.
The roughest part was when it first started, the ground attack, the mortar attack, and they were hitting us with rockets, all three at the same time. We had to get our stuff together and fight back. We didn't have any positions dug in. All we could do was fight right on the ground behind trees, behind rucksacks, and everything else.
The movement against U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War began small, among peace activists and leftist intellectuals on college campuses, but gained national prominence in 1965 after the United States began bombing North Vietnam in earnest. Anti-war marches and other protests, such as the ones organized by Students for a Democratic Society, attracted a widening base of support over the next 3 years. Peaking in early 1968 after the successful Tet Offensive by the North Vietnamese troops proved that the war's end was nowhere in sight. On October 21, 1967, one of the most prominent anti-war demonstrations took place, as some 100,000 protesters gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. Around 30,000 of them continued in a march on the Pentagon later that night. After a brutal confrontation with soldiers and U.S. Marshals protecting the building, hundreds of demonstrators were arrested. One of them was author Norman Mailer, who chronicled the events in his book, The Armies of the Night, published the following year to widespread acclaim. Also in 1967, the anti-war movement got a big boost when civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. went public with his opposition to the war on moral grounds. condemning the war's diversion of federal funds from domestic programs as well as the disproportionate number of African American casualties in relation to the total numbers of soldiers killed in the war.
Trust in government dropped dramatically during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The results of various studies show that views about the role of the United States in the Vietnam War played a substantial part in the decline in government trust. It remains clear today that the war changed America in profound ways still not understood. The war changed who we are and how we see ourselves. It fundamentally revised our view of the world and the world's view of us. It reshaped our institutions, particularly in the military. It altered not only how we fight wars, but when and why we choose to fight. Americans fought fiercely and gallantly in Vietnam. The Medal of Honor was awarded to more than 250 individuals. U.S. troops won nearly every significant battle, yet it was all in vain. Many fighting men would feel betrayed by political leaders and people at home who turned against the war. At home, the war taught a generation of young people not to trust their government. In an astonishingly short period of time, they taught their parents and even some political leaders.
This war is too much. I think we need to take action right now.
Yeah, man, let's protest. Hey!
Sucks.
We won't go. We won't go. We won't go. We won't go.